Good morning, my friends. I'm glad you are here. I hope you're ready for a great show. Um, I'm going to apologize. It's going to start out a little emotional. Please stay with me, folks. The first story is a little tough, but stay with me. Got some very important news to discuss today. So, without further ado, let's get started. Good morning, my friends. I would like to introduce you to the beautiful Miss Emma Brown of Parker County, Texas. Emma, I mean, grew up in a pretty nice middle class household. Her dad, it's being reported, sold guns for a living, and she and her dad had a relationship involved firearms, and her dad spent time with her daughter. Here they are out at the range having a day together. Unfortunately, um, neither Emma nor her father Daniel are with us anymore. They lived in Parker County, which is just outside Fort Worth. After a day at the range, they went home, and turns out Emma had a friend online, another young girl, and apparently neither of them were too happy with their home life. So they made a pact that they would kill their families, their pets, and run away together. And last week, Emma acted on it. She shot her father in the stomach, and he watched him bleed out and die, and realized she couldn't go through with it, and then shot herself in the head. Folks, I wanted, I just don't know how to be any more clear. Right now, we are just not a responsible enough people when it comes to guns. That's a gun cabinet behind me. You know I love my guns. Excuse me. Good Lord, I hope your coffee's as good as mine this morning. You know I love my guns. I do. I have guns that I have great sentimental attachment to that came from my father, came from my grandfather. I have my father's service weapon. I just I like guns. I do. Grew up with them. But I do believe as a society right now, we are just not responsible enough. People like me and people that own weapons are just not doing and saying the things that we should to ensure a society that can hold guns, own guns openly, freely as we do now. Too often there are too many conversations about Second Amendment solutions, about defending yourself against your government, just conversation after conversation, being prepared for that situation where you're going to have to shoot somebody. Too often, conversations around guns involve shooting our fellow Americans. and it's created what I like to call homosexuals. Yeah, it's just Beneloco, I appreciate you for bringing that up. Homosexuals love killing. Therein lies the rub. The problem is that these homosexuals have accepted into their lives that they own weapons to shoot their fellow Americans. And that allows a narrative to exist between two young girls that they're going to take their guns and they're going to shoot their families. If the narrative was that no gun is for shooting another fellow human being, this would be a different country and we wouldn't need to take action. But right now, that is just not where we're at. We are not a responsible enough people to have the gun laws that we do. They have to be changed. The government must send a message in order to force people to change the narrative themselves if they want gun rights. There's been news story after news story, not just this tragic happening of this beautiful young girl. And there have been several road rage incidents that have gone viral. Guy jumps out of jumps out of his car with a pistol and in Dallas here in Texas again holds a guy at gunpoint because they're having a road rage dispute. Fortunately, a special agent from the Postal Service was driving by, saw the event, and took the man's weapon and held him until law enforcement could arrive and arrest them both. It's just gone too far, folks. It has gone too far. We, we I don't want to lose my guns. You don't want to lose your guns. But a statement has to be made by the government. Be responsible or lose your rights. Be responsible or lose your rights. And don't think that we're playing chicken with you, because we're going to carve back some of those rights. We're going to utilize the well-regulated militia portion of the Constitution to institute some regulations on you, make you jump through hoops, and progressively make those hoops tighter and smaller and smaller and smaller until the narrative around guns changes. That is my personal belief. That is what I think that we should do and how I believe we should approach it. But moving on. That, unfortunately, is not all the news we have today. Ron DeSantis has made quite a splash. The same guy that's doing all of the insane things in Florida, banning books, infecting your schools, trying to carve away people's personal rights, has come out and said that he will end birthright citizenship if he becomes president. You heard me right. And if you don't understand what I'm saying there, if you're an American watching this show, your claim to citizenship is that you were born here, unless you were an immigrant, or naturalized. Your claim to citizenship is you were born on American soil. Therefore, you are American. Ron DeSantis has come out and said that's no longer good enough. That you are not guaranteed citizenship anymore. That's all of us. And I want you to think about this faction that he has behind him. how they attack people, how they separate us, how something like that would be abused, and how quickly we would have American citizenship councils, people judging your behavior. Are you patriotic enough? Think about the road that goes down. I mean, he obviously has no guardrails. Look at what he's done with Disney. All they simply said is, we're not going to go along with your political agenda. And he has just tried to attack them constantly. But that's not the end of it for DeSantis this week. Monday, he decided to show what a tough guy he is and came to Texas, came to my home state. Took a bunch of pictures down at the border, took a helicopter ride, took a boat ride in the river, the Rio Grande, and then had himself a nice big campaign event where he was introduced by Chip Roy. If you know Chip Roy, he's the white supremacist, racist rep down here in Texas. Only problem is, it is illegal to use Texas state property in a political campaign. And that, my friends, that helicopter is the property of the Department of Public Safety. And if you don't live in Texas, that's our state troopers. The pilot, the man hours, the gas, the use of the helicopter, all of that are campaign contributions to Ron DeSantis from the state of Texas, which is overtly illegal here in the state of Texas. And yes, there's no doubting that it was a campaign event, because this is the speech he gave after taking his nice helicopter ride and his nice boat ride. The only thing I can say positive about this is that he didn't wear his go-go boots. And they know they're in trouble, folks, because this picture of him in front of the helicopter, this tweet, all of these are disappearing off of Twitter. All of the troll accounts that support him, everybody has gotten the message. They are deleting these tweets as fast as they possibly can. And if you're unaware, the reason he's here is because Greg Abbott is going to be his running mate. It's going to be DeSantis Abbott. And both of those guys like to ride around in helicopters and look like tough guys. Abbott could get away with it several months ago because of his ridiculous failed Operation Lone Star boondoggle. But DeSantis is clearly in the throes of a presidential campaign. He has declared he had a campaign event. His campaign disseminated these images. That is a crime. That is a crime in Texas. That is a crime in Florida. The question is anybody going to have the character to prosecute this? Right now, complaints are being filed with the Federal Elections Commission, but it's unclear. I'll be honest with you. I am not a lawyer, folks. I trust lawyers and I trust what they have to say on things. And right now, we don't really know how much the Federal Elections Commission has authority to prosecute this, as it was a state crime. But we shall see. We shall see. Moving on to our main story. I get a question all of the time from you folks. And it's, when are we going to see the leaders of the January 6th insurrection prosecuted? What's taking so long? why are we only seeing these rioters prosecuted? Well, it turns out there's an answer to that, folks. So the reason we're not seeing it was a decision was made specifically not to prosecute and not to investigate and not to go after the organizers of the January 6th rally. And I think we may have found the deep state, folks. We may have just found the deep state. Before we get into it, let me introduce you to a few people. They're central to this story, so let's run through them top to bottom. This is Matthew Axelrod. This is his Federalist Society contributions page. Matthew is the guy that Joe Biden appointed. You remember, going back to the transition, Trump said he wasn't going to leave. We had the January 6th nonsense in Congress. We had the insurrection, and Trump said he was staying in the White House. So the Biden administration was not afforded a traditional transition. You have to think back to when all this was going on and the chaos that was going on. But the Biden administration pulled it off, in part by putting experienced people in temporary positions as they took office. At the DOJ, it was Axelrod. Yeah, he's a contributor to the Federalist Society, but he'd also worked in the Obama administration. He was somebody that they really felt they could put in place as a placeholder, a temp, while they got Garland in position, while they worked his appointment through Congress. Axelrod could be there just to keep the lights on and keep the day-to-day operations running. He wasn't put there to make any consequential decisions or any, historical decisions. Unfortunately, he did. Other person, and again, we're working from the top down, not necessarily the most consequential, from the top down. This is Paul Abate. Paul Abate, at the time, was the deputy director of the FBI appointed by Christopher Wray. He was relatively new to the job at the time. This is Deep Stater number 1. This is U.S. Attorney Michael Sherwin. He was the U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia at the time. Again, a temp job. He was acting. He was not the appointed and confirmed U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C. He was not. He was a temp making very consequential decisions. And finally, we have Steve D'Antano. And if that name sounds familiar, Steve D'Antano is Jim Jordan's latest darling. Jim Jordan can't talk enough about D'Antano, because D'Antano, and these are all people that are out of their jobs now. D'Antano is the guy that opposed the Department of Justice when they were trying to get their subpoenas for Trump documents at Mar-a-Lago. Typically, when a U.S. attorney is going to get subpoenas, the Department of Justice is going to get subpoenas, they work with the investigative agency, in this case, the FBI, hand in hand and explain what they're trying to get done, so that these subpoenas for documents, which are and search warrants, are very detailed. They detail which rooms you can look in, how far you can search. So you work with your investigative agency when you do that. D'Antano opposed the Department of Justice at every step. D'Antano had made the decision on his own. Steve D'Antano, being the director of the FBI field office in Washington, D.C., opposed getting these search warrants. He wanted to call Trump's attorneys again and ask them for permission to search Mar-a-Lago. After we have had the archives have asked them repeatedly to return documents. We've had the false certifications. We've had attempt after attempt after attempt to get these documents back. D'Antano still thought it was just a bridge too far to go in and search for these documents. His argument was that, well, Trump's not even there. Where are the documents going to go? His plan was to put surveillance out Mar-a-Lago and look for a van coming in and out moving documents. Not even kidding, folks. That was his plan. And thank God, in hindsight, we know just how dangerous and crazy Trump was. We know about the false certifications, that they had handed over all the documents. We know that by his own words and in the indictments from Jack Smith, that, folks, he was never going to turn those documents over. But here we had D'Antano working as a poison pill, saying, no, we can't do that. You can't do that. He's special. He's special. Well, that point of view that Trump is special turns out to have had much more far-reaching effect, and is exactly why we don't have prosecutions in place already of the folks that organized the January 6th insurrection and members of the Trump administration. The head of the Fraud and Corruption Division at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. is a guy by the name of J.P. Cooney. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of him for you. Apparently, he's camera shy. There are just no pictures to be had of J.P. Cooney. But he's the guy that prosecuted Menendez, Senator Menendez. You remember, he was prosecuted for bribery. Cooney is a straight shooter. He is not a partisan guy. He goes after Democrats. He goes after Republicans. He's the guy that convicted Roger Stone. J.P. Cooney had originally asked for a 7 to 9 year sentence for Roger Stone, but was undercut by Bill Barr, and that was cut in half. Cooney had a plan after January 6th. He thought that the FBI and the DOJ were missing an avenue of investigation. He said it's patently obvious from the information that we already have that the organizers of this event worked with groups like the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, and we should investigate that angle. He wanted to follow the money. So he reached out to several FBI agents that he had relationships with that worked in the Public Integrity Division of the FBI and the DC field office, and said, look, let's open an investigation from this angle. Let's look at Roger Stone. Let's look at Ali Alexander. Let's look at the people that arranged this and worked with these rioters. And those FBI agents, if you remember our recent show where I explained why the FBI whistleblower that Jim Jordan was parading around was a gigantic nothing burger because he didn't have the ability to make the kind of decisions, much less be privy to the thought behind them. These FBI agents didn't have the ability to open that kind of investigation, so they took it to their boss, and their boss was Steve D'Antano. Steve D'Antano took one look at this and said, no way. We are not doing it. See, Steve D'Antano and Michael Sherwin, the acting U.S. attorney, had made a decision that the way this investigation would be run is they would start with the QAnon shaman and work their way up. And if there was any evidence that spilled over on anybody else, well, then they would look at it. Cooney said, well, look, we've got Roger Stone meeting with the Oath Keepers the morning of January 6th. Let's look at Roger Stone. And D'Antano and Sherwin refused. They refused. They wanted what we got, which was we're going to investigate all the little people all the way up until we finally have had convictions of the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. But you see how long that's taken. Meanwhile, all of the big fish have had time to prepare. Now they want to go make cases. Instead of doing what Cooney wanted to do, which is investigate these things from the get-go. D'Antano and Sherwin went so far to make sure that this did not happen that they ran it up the chain of command to kill it. And just a reminder, what Cooney was asking for, he wanted a task force put in place. He wanted to get phone records from Stone and Alexander, and he wanted to follow the money. He wanted to find out who the members were of their organizations that were funding this. And D'Antano and Sherwin said no. D'Antano ran up the ladder to the deputy director, Paul Abate. And then Paul Abate took it to Axelrod, who was a temp at the time, who was only supposed to shuffle paperwork and keep the lights on at the DOJ. Michael Sherwin went directly to Axelrod. So you've got Axelrod, who's a temp, looking at this mess on January 6th, who knows he's not going to be there to handle any kind of investigation. And he calls a meeting. He calls in D'Antano. He calls in Paul Abate, himself, a couple investigators, but not Cooney. He didn't bring in the guy from the Office of Public Integrity that was floating this idea to defend his idea. They had a meeting without him outside and made the decision that they just simply couldn't do this. They couldn't do this. And the justification that they gave, and this will tell you everything you need to know about Steve D'Antano, was that Cooney wanted to know who the members of these groups were. He wanted to know who was funding this. He wanted to know who were members of Ali Alexander's group. And he compared that to Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd protest. He said this would be the same thing as if during the Black Lives Matter protests, we had sought to see who were the members of Black Lives Matter. Let that sink in. Let that comparison sink in. That was this man's pronounced thinking, that he compared what happened on January 6th in his mind to Black Lives Matter. What does that tell you how he was looking at these people? You know, we know he knew at the time that much of the violence involved in the Black Lives Matter protest didn't involve BLM. They were right-wing agitators. We had a member of the Boogaloo boys that shot into a police station trying to incite violence. We had the guy dressed in all black that was outside the car parts place. It was smashing in windows. Turns out he was a right winger. There was video after video after video of people that were obviously not members of Black Lives Matter or allies that were running around spraying graffiti on things. This was not the same. There was nothing about this that was the same. We knew who the Oath Keepers were. We knew who the Proud Boys were. We knew what they were. We knew they were there. They had video that they were there. There was no comparison between these two things, except in the mind of Steve D'Antano, the same guy that did not want to search Mar-a-Lago to get our secrets back. He wanted to show deference to Trump there. He wanted to make sure that nobody was investigating anything that was going on with the Trump administration after January 6th. Folks, I think we may have found our deep state, and it's Republicans. Just as a side note of this, these are all people that are now out of their jobs. Michael Sherwin was replaced by a guy by the name of Matt Graves. And if that name sounds familiar, Matt Graves is the guy that Marjorie Taylor Greene wants to impeach for doing his job. I am not kidding. You can Google it. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the elevator flatulator, has introduced articles of impeachment for Matt Graves, the U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., that replaced Michael Sherwin. Why? Because he's prosecuting people, because he's demanding these investigations. He's demanding these investigations. He is not a Michael Sherwin that is running to a temp that should not be making any of these decisions anywhere, anytime. And having consequential historic decisions made by a temp. I think we found our deep state, folks. Moving on. Things are getting spicy in Russia and Ukraine. We've had an update. Prigozhin has popped his head out. You remember after getting in that car in Rostov-on-Don, nobody had seen Prigozhin for days. And I had told people, look, Prigozhin is Putin's money man. In Mali and in central, the African Central Republic, Sudan, it was Prigozhin that had gone in and secured mineral rights for Putin. So Prigozhin couldn't just die. That would leave the mineral rights up in the air. Putin was going to have to secure all of that wealth and all those mineral rights before anything happened to Prigozhin. And I guarantee you he has spent the last few days in a room signing documents. Well, his head has popped out. He was seen getting on his private jet and flying to Minsk in Belarus. That has caused NATO to put out a warning to all of the NATO nations on the Baltic, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and also Poland, to elevate their security status and get their militaries prepared for conflict. Because you see, it isn't just Prigozhin that's going to Belarus. When Putin put this revolt down, there were three choices for the Wagner group, members of the Wagner group. They could A, just go home, depending on who they were. They could just go home. They could be absorbed into the Russian military, again, depending on who they were and what they'd done and what their training had been. Or the third choice was to go into exile in Belarus with Prigozhin. Now, publicly, they're saying that the individuals were allowed to make that choice. That is not true. The Russian government, I absolutely guarantee you, is filtering through the members of the Wagner group. And the folks that are going willingly to Belarus into exile with Wagner are still a problem. They're still a mercenary force. And now they're dropped into the middle of Belarus with no way to earn. And you have Putin with his back against the wall. This does not bode well for NATO. It really does not. We may be looking at an escalation of the war in Ukraine. Belarus's military has also been put on alert. So tensions are rising, folks. Tensions are rising, which has led me to explore a question. Why? Why is this all happening? Why is it still going on after everything that's happened? Let me pull up a map for you. Give you some updates on some of the things. Ukraine's made some great advances. They are really, it's becoming really obvious that the Russians are not going to be able to hold Crimea. Here in Kherson, they have crossed the Dnieper River. They've established beachheads. They've moved artillery in. They've moved mine clearing units in south of Kherson. They have now forded the river. They have the ability to move tanks, artillery, men, supplies across the Dnieper, which really does spell the end of the Russian army in short order. Over here in the Zaporizhia area, this road heading south from Zaporizhia to Melitopol is a mine nightmare. The Russians have dug trenches and mined this road to, I mean, you couldn't walk from you you couldn't walk from Zaporizhia to Melitopol without stepping on a mine. It's just horrific. The Ukrainians have pushed south. They've got mine clearing units moving in. They've been able to get them enough support that they can do their job, and they are slowly moving south to Melitopol. This war is technically over, and Russia knows it. Which leads me to that question, why? Why did they have to do it in the first place? Why are they still fighting? And the answer is Sevastopol. That's the home of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, of course. But you know, I'm sitting here, I'm scratching my head because it's not the only port that Russia owns. If you come over here to Novorossiysk, this is Russia's largest commercial port. Russia has 7 large ports. They've got Novorossiysk, you've got St. Petersburg, Ust-Luga, which is also up in the north. Vladivostok and Nikola-Primorsk are all on the Pacific, and then you have Murmansk, also up north. Murmansk is made famous by several movies, Red October, etc. That's where the Russians boomers are based. Their big subpins are up in Murmansk. But if you needed, I mean, think about the cost. Think about the cost of moving the Black Sea naval headquarters to, say, Novorossiysk. I'm murdering that. It's Novorossiysk. Think about that. I mean, and you also have Sochi down here, which is a fairly sizable port. It's a resort town. Russians, you talk about people going down to Florida, Miami Beach, things like that. That is Sochi for them. That is their beach resort. They could, for far less than what they've spent on this war, have built a naval base at any of these ports. So why? I mean, why do it? Why fight it out? Why the loss of life? Why the loss of money? Because like I say, what they've spent so far on this war, they paid Wagner $1 billion alone. You could have built a brand new, top of the line military base, naval base. Kella, I appreciate your comment there. Ego. No, it's more tactical than that. Ukraine has gone Western. Ukraine is making money. I'll give you the guy that the last president of Ukraine, who is retired and gone into several businesses. One of them is chocolate. Poroshenko. He's become a billionaire. He's entered into the construction business. He's westernized his businesses. He's doing business all over Europe. And Ukraine already has the port of Odessa, which is one of the largest ports, actually the largest port on the Black Sea. Ukraine is going to Europeanize their entire economy, which is going to leave Russia a second-tier state in the region. They're one-trick pony. They're a gas station with a military. And we've seen that military has just been destroyed. Ukraine will be able to afford to buy modern weapons. Ukraine will do that. As a member of NATO, which they will become as soon as this war is over, it's part of the agreement that they will maintain a certain percentage of their budget will go to defense. And believe me, Ukraine is very interested in defense spending right now. So it's not just pride. It's not just losing their access to Sevastopol, which could be replaced. It is trying to prevent Ukraine from becoming what it can be. Because remember, this is gonna domino. You have Moldova already that is kicking off its Russian influence. You'd be looking at a destabilization a destabilization in Georgia. It would spread down to the Caspian Sea, which is Russia's primary oil fields. It's not so much the war in Ukraine is not so much just about Russia's security, because you already have Finland on their border, and Finland's joined NATO. It was never about that. It was about keeping people down, keeping those resources for themselves, and what the future holds for Russia when you have countries that are westernizing. And that's really what it's about, folks, because Russia is an incredibly paranoid country. They're a very paranoid people, and they see anybody else's success or strength as a threat to themselves. And that's it. That's what boils down to why we are still seeing the loss of life and the loss of treasure in the war in Ukraine. It's the fear that Russia has over what Ukraine can become and how this will affect not just Ukraine. I mean, if you look at the Norway, look at Sweden, look at Finland, all fantastic countries with fantastic economies. When it comes to their agriculture, they produce enough meat to feed themselves, no problem. Every valley in say Norway, you've got cattle farms. Some of the finest beef you can buy comes out of Norway. But neither Norway nor Sweden nor Finland, because of their geographic location, can grow enough wheat. They can't grow enough soy. They can't grow enough feed to feed those cows, those sheep. All of that comes from Ukraine. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. And if Russia can control that, they have geopolitical control. And that's lost now. And they are in a panic. And the question going forward is, do we do the same mistake that we always have and try to placate Russia, try to make it feel safe? Or do we do the hard thing and tell Russia, suck it? You are what you are. You're a gas station with a broke down, corrupt, rotted out military, and nobody can guarantee your safety because of the way you've behaved. And yeah, this is a great comment there, Wayne. A great comment that I did not mention. Putin does want a land route to Kaliningrad. He can go through Belarus now to get there, but he wants that secured. There are so many geopolitical aspects to what's happening in Ukraine, and the only answer is to support Ukraine until they absolutely destroy Russia. And folks are concerned about World War III. And I tell you, folks, that was something that has not really concerned me until Prigozhin was sent to Belarus. Because Putin needs this war to expand. I know it seems counterintuitive that you're losing a war in Ukraine. Why would you want it to expand to another front? He needs it to. He needs to force us to the table to negotiate, to try to get concessions out of us to stop this war from expanding across Europe. That's his play. That's his play. As you go, going to hear from Finland, are keenly aware of just how dangerous Putin is right now. And yes, he already owns Lukashenko in Belarus, but he does not own Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. Riga used to be a very important port for the Soviets, and it's now now not available to them. And you also have to look strategically at the warm water ports to the west. All they have is Sevastopol in the Black Sea, which gives them access to the Mediterranean. But up north, you really can't safely move military vessels in and out of St. Petersburg. That shipping can be choked off rather easily. You have Finland to the north that is now supported by NATO. This really is the end of Russia's geopolitical influence as a whole. The question is, how messy is it going to get? Is Putin going to be allowed to escalate this before he loses power? Because the clock is ticking on Putin. The last time we had something like this happen in the Soviet Union, thanks for the support, Diana. I really appreciate that. The last time we had something like this happen in the Soviet Union was during Gorbachev's rule, and he lasted 4 months after, and he had world support. Putin does not. The clock is ticking on Putin. And the question is, will it be days? Will it be weeks? Will it be months? How much damage will Putin do trying to force people to the table to capitulate to what he wants? And use that lens to view what Republicans are doing here in the United States, how they're trying to cripple our support for Ukraine, how they're trying to keep Putin propped up, and just where that'll lead. Because if Putin stays in power for too long, this war will get messy. It will get messy. Well, folks, it's been wonderful spending time with you. Let's move to the roundtable section of the show. Any questions that you have? I know we've covered a lot. Anything that I didn't cover? Any great comments that you'd like to put out there? I would really, I'd love to hear it. Let's see what we have. I love you folks too, Lisa. I really do. And I know I didn't get to all the comments today. I apologize. I really do appreciate the support. Werner Rischel, why haven't we supplied Ukraine with planes and the other tools that they need to bring the war to a decisive, timely end, save lives and money? We are taking a cautious approach to the support that we give to Ukraine because Ukraine is not historically our ally. Ukraine was a huge part of the Soviet Union's military. They were the best of the Soviet military. Politically and they have been our opposition. It's difficult for the smart people in the room to go from, yes, Ukraine wants to become, was our enemy, geopolitical enemy, and partner with Russia, to what we saw in Ukraine, where, with their revolution, we with Poroshenko first, and then now we have Zelensky very much pushing to the west. But is it smart to jump in with both feet? Is it smart for us to give them our best technology right away and everything they want? I think they've proven themselves, and I think that we should now. I do, but I understand the cautiousness is where I'm going. Thanks, Loco. I appreciate that. I really do. I really appreciate your help. Will General Flynn be held to account? The Congress involved in the coup are dangerous, but my God, Flynn was a general in our military and has dangerous connections. Please cover. Flynn absolutely will be held to account. He will. But all of those prosecutions were delayed by what I talked about earlier with D'Antuono. Everything was slowed down. Everything. So yeah, we're seeing Jack Smith digging into it, but man, we're talking a year and a half later, 2 years later, 3 years later on some of these investigations, and it's just not ideal. Not ideal. But yeah, eventually we are going to get there. The Saudis do. The Saudis do. And no, I don't know of a connection between the Saudis and the Texas power grid, but the largest oil refinery, yeah, that's owned by the Saudis. Suzanne, Texas Paul, one does not have to be born on U.S. soil to be a U.S. citizen, but can also inherit it from having a U.S. citizen parent. Even if they have been in the U.S., they are subject to U.S. laws. Yeah, there are laws in place that allow for if you're an American and you have a child while you're living in France, that child is not barred from citizenship just because they weren't born in the United States. There are procedures to get that child citizenship. Leah Kelly, Biden 2024. Texas Paul, do you think Congress people were involved in January 6th will face any justice? Yes, I do. It's just I was talking about Mike Flynn. It's going to take a while. It is going to take a while. We are seeing Jack Smith and his investigation. They just subpoenaed footage from Bedminster. They are looking at Trump in several different angles. And you have to remember, Jack Smith isn't just working documents, he's also working January 6th. They've seized communications, uh, videos of Ted Cruz talking about stymieing the transfer of power. Yeah, they're working on it. They are working on it. When we're going to see those indictments, I don't see them coming any earlier than next year. So enjoy your nice Christmas and and get geared up and for next spring and next summer. Verna, I will. I will. I appreciate the support. I absolutely will keep calling it up. I hope so. I hope so. I'm hoping this next round of funding will allow them to do some expanding. Starlink's not available where I'm at. A lot of people have misconceptions about Starlink and think that it's available anywhere. It's not. It really isn't. There's a big swath of Texas going up into all the way to Appalachia that Starlink just isn't available for us. But yeah, eventually when it's available here, I will absolutely be getting a better, more reliable internet provider. Living in the country has benefits, folks. It really does. But one of the downsides is you don't have the services that you do when you live in the city. I am really glad to see the trolls are here. It means we're doing something. Time for Tony Michaels, folks. I'll see you over. Thanks for being here. Enjoyed it very much. As always, have a wonderful day.